If you're not familiar with Kaleido, we're part of the ConsenSys family of products, and our mission is basically to take blockchain and give it to enterprises as a service. So everything is consumed these days in the cloud, but thinking about blockchain as a decentralized technology that's really a network or an ecosystem of companies using it together. What unique attributes do companies need in a platform like that to manage it together, to scale it, to grow the network in kind of a borderless fashion? And that's the core problem that Kaleido is solving. Our special guest this morning is Microsoft. And so we have Mike Walker here from Microsoft with us. We're going to have a bit of a discussion as we kind of step through these, and I think it's great. Mike, maybe you could just say a word about kind of Microsoft's perspective on blockchain, being an early pioneer in the space.
Yeah, so it's no secret that Microsoft's cloud strategy is all about platform as a service, right? And so our higher order bit when we talk with customers is how do we enable you to do great things? Less about locking you in and all that great stuff, but really giving you guys a core platform that you can do really, really interesting things. And so the philosophy behind Kaleido around that very same aspect of enablement of developers, it fits really, really well into how we think about things as well. So, it might be interesting to know if you're not familiar with the Microsoft approach to blockchain that we actually don't have a ledger that we've developed ourselves. We've said there's plenty of good ones out there. Go ahead and use those. But we're going to deal with the last mile issues, which is essentially, most of a blockchain solution is actually not blockchain. It's actually a very small portion of an overall solution, which we see in the marketplace. It's really about, hey, how am I going to expose this to my users? How am I going to tie in sensors into this so I can now take the analog world and convert it to the digital world? And so we're concerned with how do we create a platform that enables folks like Kaleido to integrate into these other additional services, AI services, big data, etc. So that's just a tiny bit of how we think about things.
So this morning we do have some exciting news. We're announcing for the first time that Kaleido has onboarded Azure in a collaboration with Microsoft onto the platform. So now you can select from amongst Azure global regions as a deployment zone to stand up your chain. So we kind of are thinking about how and seeing these ecosystems grow and expand, and kind of the push from getting an early pilot stood up where you're willing to make a lot of compromises to going into production and really thinking about how do I now scale to my whole ecosystem. It's no longer 5 organizations, it's 50 and even 500, right? And when you really think about that as the next frontier in enterprise blockchain, then you're thinking about a whole new category of problems that you need to solve. How do I scale? How do I give kind of the right levels of participations? You're talking about making contracts smarter. Certainly in an enterprise context, you're thinking about levels of privacy and confidentiality, a certain amount of the data you want to be exposed, but a lot of the collaborations that happen business to business also need to be private and confidential. And of course, just diversity, right? These networks are decentralized. So, we want them to go wherever it makes sense for organizations to run and to operate. We recognize they have existing investments, and in particular cloud stack, in a data center, you're looking at hybrid strategies. And so blockchain as kind of a next generation solution also needs to plug into the rest of the things that your organizations are already investing in. And Microsoft being, both the pioneer in the space, but also really innovating across the blockchain stack. We see Microsoft at the open source communities, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, in those meetings, active all the way down in the weeds, talking about ConsenSys algorithms and how they scale. We see interesting projects around middleware components like Cryptlets and Project Coco. We see just services in the Microsoft catalog that have already been kind of calibrated for the needs of blockchain. So storing key materials securely is a big concern to a lot of organizations, and Microsoft is leading the way in getting those new curves supported and things like that. So I think, and then of course developer tooling as well. Maybe you could talk about kind of Microsoft's view on how just connecting with developers and how the tooling aspect of that fits in with things like Ethereum, so .NET Ethereum and so on.
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say that, it's kind of a match made in heaven here with Kaleido and the Azure platform because, really we don't try to get into this more software as a service or rapid deployment space a whole lot. We want to create an ecosystem, a marketplace to enable folks like Kaleido to be successful. Right now we've got, some great tooling. We've got, our blockchain workbench, which will get you from, a idea to a pilot in about 2 days, which is drastically different when you look at just spinning up a server somewhere under your desk or go on AWS, whatever it may be. So what we want to do is we want to take that to the next level, which is here, I think, in this type of partnership. And so the other piece of this also is we're continuously adding more and more developer support to the platform, specifically for these ledger technologies. So if you weren't aware, we just released a blockchain developer kit. So that we released that about a month ago. And so we've got a ton of accelerators that will help you figure out things like typical track and trace scenarios, for example, like supply chain. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to, based on our thousands of engagements with customers, is start to codify that and say, okay, well, what does this mean? What are some repeatable patterns in the marketplace? And build that in. Even things like as controversial as things like deepfakes. We talk to big media companies that are like, we want to make sure that this image is genuine. Or maybe it's the NBA, where we say, hey, this graphic is a certified graphic. Well, putting that on the blockchain, what does that look like? Or things like regulatory compliance with GDPR. How do you handle things along those lines when you got an immutable ledger, right? So we're continuously releasing both accelerators, but also you're going to see announcements at Build that I can't spoil for you, around our continued commitment to building a robust blockchain platform as a service rather than a niche solution set. And then the other thing that I'll say real quickly as well is that we have those other ancillary pieces as well. So you'd mentioned Coco, which thank God we renamed that thing. But essentially, from a secure compute perspective, if you are dealing in a highly regulated space or highly secured space, let's say you're working with the Department of Defense, or maybe you're working in a particular area within banking or cap markets, it's very important that we protect not only from an external perspective, but also the majority of the hacks come from within companies, not outside companies. So Coco, the project formerly known as Coco, is essentially a partnership with Intel where we actually have customized hardware where it prevents human beings from interacting with the application code and the data. And so we're looking at all aspects of the problem, not just the ledger problem, but how do we take this and build actual solutions and make this mainstream? And then the last bit is consortiums. We see an enormous momentum around consortiums with blockchain in that permission private world. And we're continuously working with our partner ecosystem to figure out what are the best approaches to solving that problem, whether it be technical, but oftentimes it's a business problem. So how do we start to change our viewpoint on how we look at this technology as well? So those are just some of the things. Did I touch on the things that you were thinking about?
That's great. So let's stay on consortia for a minute then. I think that's really a topic that we're hearing a lot about. And consortium, of course, we're repeat offenders in the IT space. So we're borrowing a term that's existed around for a while that comes with baggage depending on what industry you're in. But just kind of this idea of consortium blockchain, which I'll define as just recognizing the fact that you're doing this as a group, right? That if you're going to get the benefits of blockchain, you're going to change the trust model amongst the parties. If you're going to decentralize the ownership of the network, then you need to change the way that you're organizing yourselves. You can't just sit on what we like to call the hug your data sort of scenario. You're hunkered down in your data center, and it's my copy of the data, so I feel really great about that. Never mind that it's broken all over the place because we're trying to coordinate and stay in sync across everyone else's copy of the data and all of that. But if you're going to move to a new, more collaborative model, then you really need to think about the structure of how you're organized. And that's what we call kind of consortium blockchain. So and a lot of times maybe you could dive into the concept of governance and how you kind of set up controls for, what are the rules? What are the rules of the road? How do you onboard new people? How do you do something as simple as deploy a new version of a smart contract?
Yeah, if I had a DeLorean, I could go back a few years. I would probably, shoot the person who came up with the word consortium for how we talk about this, because it just causes a whole lot of problems just logistically. So if you're, one of the first things you're going to do is whenever you have a multi-company engagement is you're going to bring in the lawyers. And consortium has prior art. It means something. And it doesn't mean a lot of times what we're talking about here. So just having a level set that really what we're talking about, and I really like that you put it here, is we're talking about building ecosystems, right? And so this is no different. I worked in the banking space. It's no different when, the bank that I work for created the ATM network. It's no different than back in the 70s when they were building those ecosystems, and we saw what the trend was. Individual companies got together, and then slowly it fanned out and built out to where you have more industry-wide and maybe even cross-industry-based ecosystems. I almost said consortiums. So, why is this important? One, we have to learn those business lessons from the past. But two, the majority of this is figuring out what type of business model do you want to create first. Because what tends to happen is we jump into building some code, and then we build this consortium, and then no one's on the same page. Or the lawyers aren't on the same page, or the people that write the checks aren't on the same page. So we have to first figure out what is the business model that we're trying to create here. That's going to inform all of our other decisions. So, for example, one company that I'm working with, supply chain oriented in the defense and aviation space, essentially what they want to do is they want to have all these great benefits, the operational efficiency we talked about with Microsoft. However, they want it to be more of a founder-led business model, which means they have all the nodes behind their firewall, and it's not distributed out there. Now, you might say from a purist perspective, well, that's not blockchain. Why didn't they just use a traditional database? However, based on the unique characteristics of blockchain and the security that they got out of the box, it made a whole lot of sense for them. So we want to make sure that we understand those types of business models that will tie directly to your economic models in which you're going to build around this. Are we going to be able to monetize this? What's the cost surrounding this? Onboarding, offboarding, the governance, the steering committees, all that great stuff. And then we can finally get to the governance questions, which is essentially how we manage all those decisions that we made. And so it's really important that we go back to that step zero and figure out what are we trying to accomplish here, and then that will inform our architecture and address all these issues. And what we're finding, because we've did a broad analysis across the globe, and essentially it's all public information, so if you guys want it, I can share it with you. Essentially, we are tracking 75 consortiums around the world, and we've identified key patterns on why they built it, even things like their choice of law. Why did they pick a JV versus an MOU versus open source versus a traditional consortium? Why did they make these decisions? And are they successful or not? And so by looking at the marketplace and understanding what are the current trends, we can also be smarter in answering these questions as well. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Any point, jump in. This is an open dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's also because there's a lot of engineers here today. Once you solve, this is a project you can't just go and knock out purely in the IT organization. You got to get the lines of business involved. You got to figure out kind of in parallel how you're going to organize yourself, whether it's a more loose-knit collaboration or whether you're going to create a new company and invest. We've seen new companies spin up. We've seen essentially these business networks become shareholders in the new company. We've seen them donating people, so there's a whole spectrum of possible models there. You mentioned a few of them. But once you've done all that, then we're back to IT.
Yep.
And, the kind of what we call shared IT, this idea that if you think about all the hurdles that it takes to deploy a new update into production on some existing system, all the controls, the risk team, the compliance team, there's manual testing, there's automated testing, all of those sorts of checks and balances, if you will, they're in place. What does that mean across the shared network? And how do you scale that problem? The tools that we have today aren't really tailored to solve that. And so that's something with Kaleido that we see as really important and a valuable part of the overall solution that needs to come together. And of course, it's one of those things. There's human beings involved, so technology can help to a certain degree, but it's also about kind of bringing those new collaborative models, not just in the business unit, but over the fence into IT. We see calls with one banking consortium that comes to mind. It's based in Europe with 15, now 20 banks. There's calls with 75, 90 people from IT, all syncing up on and coordinating their different systems together. And if you hear all this stuff, maybe for the first time, you're saying, is the world really going to work that way? Let's talk a little bit about the data. People don't know about your background, perhaps, but you may have kicked this data off in a prior life at Gartner doing some studies, but we've been tracking this kind of consortium blockchain concept for a while now. And one of the papers may have been Deloitte I was reading. If you do the math, you're looking at 220% year-over-year growth. So an explosion in these kind of formations that are coming together, and now a vast majority of enterprises from this study are either already in one or are really actively looking at joining one. So a more collaborative world. If you look at our world overall, we've been talking about how the world's becoming smaller, and that's now happening in the business space as well. And blockchain's that technology that can really take things out of this siloed era of kind of hugging your data and onto a platform. Think more of like a Facebook style situation where it's not sharing a photo now, it's executing a contract, as you were saying earlier. And doing that once instead of 500 times and trying to coordinate across systems is massively efficient. We were talking yesterday, maybe you could talk about just the size of the pie, the incentive that organizations have to really go do this.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I used to work for Gartner, so I was the VP of Tech Innovation over there, and blockchain was one of those areas that I managed along with AI and IoT and some other related aspects. And here's the interesting thing about all this. So, whether or not this is a Deloitte statistic, a Gartner, or Microsoft, what have you, is that we see a fundamental shift in the business landscape, meaning that it's becoming much more distributed from a business perspective. It's flattening. There's key incentives for the Ubers of the world, the Airbnbs of the world. They're making a material impact on the marketplace. So that's one component. The other component is the pervasiveness of edge-based technologies. So Gartner says there's going to be 30 billion, and so you got to raise your pinky up every time you say that. There's going to be 30 billion IoT devices by 2020. That's a lot of connectivity. We've got more data than we've ever had, and this is, as of 2006, we had more data generated in that year than in the history of humanity. So we got a lot of data out there, a lot of ways we can use it. Now, we've got great technologies like blockchain that can actually enable our businesses, where the more legacy-based technologies, it made it really, really cumbersome and difficult to automate that. So there's a reason why businesses are going down this path, is because it's, one, out of necessity, because they see their competitors, both the ones they know about and the ones they don't know about, essentially attack their business model. And they want to make sure that the industry they're in, they're driving, whether they're competitors. And so, we're looking at, over the next decade, that the business value that blockchain is going to provide to the marketplace is going to be around 3.1 trillion to the marketplace in business opportunity. This is in both monetization, but also operational efficiency. So there's a lot that's going to be happening over the next decade. I'll tell you that based on the data that we're seeing and based on data like this, you see kind of this ramp, and then it's going to hit a lull, and then around 2023 is really where we see the acceleration. A lot of this are factors that we don't control in technology, like regulation, things like data sovereignty, jurisdictions and countries where I've got a global company, and blockchain, decentralizes this stuff. And so, how do we deal with existing laws? Or simple things like I was meeting with a regulator a couple weeks ago, and she was like, Mike, you'd be surprised, just signing into the hospital, we need your physical signature. Because if you check the okay, I agree box, that doesn't count as consent legally. And so we're dealing with existing laws like that. So that's why, while the technology is going to provide a lot of uplift, especially in areas that are not as regulated, for mainstream adoption, we really need to get our regulations and laws in order. And the good news, like you had mentioned, Microsoft, IBM, and other big players are working with legislation. So I was in DC last week talking to the US Blockchain Caucus as an example. There's a tokenization bill that's being proposed right now in Congress. And we're working with those folks to not only review and make sure that it's structured appropriately, and in this particular bill, they use the word token, and it could mean 100 different things. So making sure that we get laser light focused, but also working with the standards bodies. So whether it be NIST or ISO, or be it the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which we're going to announce something here over the next couple of weeks around tokenization, which is going to be really, really cool. But I can't say any more about that. I'm just going to give you that teaser. But yeah.
Cool. So we've got just a minute or two left, and I think that's great just to see all the progress, and looking. So then it kind of begs the question: where are we right now? We understand there's a huge pie there. We understand that there are innovative companies like ConsenSys that are all in the blockchain space that are doing many things. There are companies like Kaleido that are trying to make it simple for enterprises to get their hands on the technology. And there are big companies like Microsoft also that are doing many things in the space. I think it's really important to say that to reflect on the amount of progress that has happened over the last 12, 24, 36 months. From the earliest collaboration, ConsenSys and Microsoft, where we just took the raw open source client, we set it up as a template, you could click to deploy, and you could watch the VM spinning there, but there wasn't a whole lot else that you could do. To really a groundswell we're seeing of the early adopters creating these new business structures, pushing forward, live networks today. Now, one client that we have that's trading live letters of credit, that's taking that old paper-based, email-based system, and you guys know where all the closets, right? All the skeletons and all the closets in your organization. There's files that are being FTP'd around. There's, one of the ones you read about a lot is trade finance, getting a shipping container through a port. There's people flying around with paper documents, talking about health record as well, patient data, stuff like that. These are things that we're working on every day, and that's a lot of fun. But I think it's really important to recognize, just to give you guys just a glimpse for Kaleido of the sorts of organizations that are in production that are running real systems. And we don't have time to step through those, but just as a sample, this goes across all industries. T-Mobile Tuesdays, people transparently under the covers being issued a crypto wallet to track their digital coupon. Union Bank reaching, going after remittance payments and taking something that's a 40-step process down to 5 steps. Transparent, cutting out all kinds of fees along the way, and reaching 35 million Filipinos that are unbanked because the rural banks that they bank in are themselves unbanked. So oil and gas, banking and media and entertainment, crypto collectibles is a lot of fun to talk about. But this technology is really horizontal, I think. and it's making a real impact today. What I want to do is show you, in the spirit of today, and in the spirit of being techies, just a minute sort of mini demo and into what you can do today on Kaleido. Kaleido.io is where you can find us. Log into the console. We have a free platform. We thought it was important. The first thing that you do is you set up a consortium. So really reflecting the fact that this is a group of businesses and organizations that can collaborate. You see on the screen that you can now select from regions around the world, different cloud providers, including Azure, all the approved regions. You can send out invitations. All the governance is kind of built in here, passing on permissions about what that new organization is going to be able to do on the network, establishing identities, so bridging off-chain identities to on-chain. Then once you do that, you can set up the chain itself, the physical environments. You can see you now can select from the region where you want your node to go into. We have different clients, different ConsenSys algorithms at your fingertips, so you can experiment with those and get the right fit for your use case. Then, of course, you want to plug into the underlying cloud substrate underneath you and push logs and snapshot backups and all those sorts of things. Once your node's there, you want to connect to it. You can either do that via the raw APIs, or you can use our scalable messaging tier in for transaction peak smoothing out of peak workloads and reliable guaranteed delivery. We operate a decentralized marketplace as well, with lots of services that are available plug and play. It's the only one in the industry pre-integrated into the chain, recognizing that the chain is really only 10% of what you're trying to do. We now see a whole stack of storage, of crypto components, of data feeds, of oracles, all needing to come together to create a single solution. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the 30-minute discussion. Big thanks to Mike and Microsoft, our special guest, and really exciting news to announce to you guys this morning that Kaleido now is available through the Azure Marketplace. You can go there, search for blockchain. You'll see the shiny Kaleido tile there, and you're welcome to click through on that. As we said, you go straight into the starter plan, completely free to try. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.